In the year of our Lord 1403, as England smoulders with suppressed rebellion, young Simon Branthwaite sets sail across the Atlantic in search of the lost realm of Lyonesse. His quest will take him to Rockall, a land wreathed in legend, a land of weird beasts and wondrous happenings, of great beauties and terrible dangers. And there begin adventures stranger than the wildest of Simon's imaginings. Adventures that will change the course of his life and reshape that land forever. Princes of Sundancery is the first in Anthony Swithin's fantastical Lyonesse sequence, edited by Mark Sebanc. Available in Kindle and paperback at Amazon. For further information and updates, go to theperilousquest.com.
Greetings, everyone. John DiBartolo here. We're here today with my friend Mark Sebanc talking about his new project, The Perilous Quest. Mark, how's it going?
It's going great on an autumn day here in the Upper Ottawa Valley of Ontario here in Canada.
Fantastic. So the entire series is called The Perilous Quest. Is that the name of the entire series, or how does the titling system work in all of this?
It was a title that, it was actually Bill Sargent, the originator of the project, who came up with the title of the series, and it revolves thematically around Lyonesse, which has an Arthurian element, right? It's the land of Lyonesse, the kind of mythical realm of Lyonesse. And so the whole story is thematically oriented towards this land of Lyonesse, which lies somewhere to the west of the British Isles. And so I could get into the story here, actually how the story unfolds.
Let's talk about, since this is going to be a series. How many books are planned in the series?
There's 12 books. Four were published by HarperCollins in the 1990s, and they're the ones that are, at this point, they're going to be republished by Gollancz in London in the UK. And then, as reworked, heavily edited and reworked by me. And so, there are 12 novels altogether. There are 8 in manuscript in Bill Sargent's, who's now deceased, in his study in Saskatoon and Saskatchewan, Canada, where he was a university professor. So there were 8 left in manuscript, and those I have the manuscript versions, and those will be reworked and edited by me as well. So in total, and in the end, there should be 12 books in the series. The 11th and 12th are sort of, they're not fully developed, and there'll probably be a lot of heavy editing and interpolation by me for the 11th and 12th. But even at this point, there's been a lot of fresh new material added. Specifically the prologue to the whole series, which was entirely written by me.
So talking about the series and the titles of the series and the number of books, how many are completed now?
How many are completed? There are like 10 and a half completed.
And released?
And released now, well, that's a more complicated question. The first 4 were released in their original form in the 1990s by HarperCollins UK, but they're going to be re-released, but heavily edited and kind of transmogrified by me as editor and rewriter of the project. So the 2 new versions, the 2 first novels have been released in their new version by Gollancz in London. And 2 are forthcoming, and the 2 forthcoming ones I'm in the middle of editing and rewriting, and they'll be sent to Gollancz when I'm done for publication.
Excellent. So available now to people online are how many?
The two Princess of Sundancery and the Lords of the Stony Mountains.
Right. So would you recommend that is this the kind of a series where people should really start with the first, or can they jump in at any time, or?
I'd probably recommend that they start with the first. I think, it would, I think, make better sense in this case, because it is a narrative, it's a story, and there's a kind of linear progression to it. And so I think I would recommend that they start with the first, but it's not, it's not impossible to start with the second or third or fourth or whatever, wherever you jump in.
So they could be perceived as kind of standalone stories in and of themselves.
Yeah, I think like an intelligent reader could pick up on the progression of the story. I mean, although like what could happen with the third one, I think is I might recommend to the editors in London that we have some sort of synopsis, which is what Bill Sargent did with the original series, the original publication back in the 1990s.
How many books were originally released by Bill Sargent?
There were four. Four were published by HarperCollins UK. And I should say, I mean, they thought he was going to be the next big phenomenon, that he was going to be, like a real big breakthrough publishing phenomenon, and that because it's such really an extraordinary feat of world building that he accomplished. But alas, that didn't happen for various reasons, not least of which was that he died very suddenly, an untimely early death from liver cancer in 2002.
Wow.
And so that cut everything short. And also there were problems. Yeah, I think he was still on a learning curve. As learned as he was a brilliant man. He was still on a learning curve as a novelist. I think there were certain stylistic and aspects of his craft that he hadn't really totally mastered yet, so there were these stylistic things that I think that impeded the kind of wide sales for the book. Well, for example, like his is a first person narrative, and so the first person narrator is always was often asking these rhetorical questions, which got to be really, well, for me, annoying, because it's an annoying tick, and I think, and there was a lot of backstory too, and information dumps that Bill kind of included in the actual body of the work, of the novels, that would have better been left in an appendix. Much as Tolkien put a lot of that kind of supporting material in an appendix, so as not to burden the reader with kind of detail that impedes the flow of the story.
Information overload, kind of.
Information overload, yeah.
So I guess now would be a good time to talk about how you came into the whole picture with some background of Bill himself. I think that's a really interesting story about
it is a hugely interesting story. Yeah, I mean, Bill, I encountered the Princess of Sundancery in its original edition very serendipitously. I live deep in the country here in Canada, and there were not a lot of bookstores near where I live, but there was a small little bookstore, and actually it functioned, I think, as a Sears outlet and a bookstore at the same time. And they had a little book rack, and anything fantasy related, just kind of my eye gravitates towards. And so I picked up a copy, just again serendipitously, of Princess of Sundancery, back in the like mid 1990s, and yeah, there were too many blurbs. Usually I'll buy on the basis of blurbs. Yeah, like that's my book buying. A lot of my book buying is dictated by that. If other people, writers whom I like and respect, have provided a blurb, I'll be swayed by their recommendation. But this one didn't have any, and I just picked it up anyway. And I think it's because I noticed he was Canadian too. I think that was on the book jack. It was just a small paperback version. And I started reading it and I said, wow, this is great stuff. This is really quite fantastic. And then one thing led to another, and I bought the sequels, and then I began corresponding with him. This was before email. Although towards the end, towards the end of his life, we were corresponding by email. But we did correspond back and forth by letter. He actually read my work, my first novel, Flight to Hollow Mountain, and he really liked my work and praised it, and so it kind of became a bit of a mutual admiration thing. And so we were in communication, and he told me he was frustrated actually at the way that his work was not properly promoted. He thought it ought to have had a better promotion and marketing, and so that was a big frustration for him. And then he told me about that he had 8 novels in manuscript as well. And I began to get a sense of the kind of sheer magnitude of his creation and of his project and what he had accomplished. And so when he died, I mean, after he died, I remember, I mean, for a while, I mean, I was all wrapped up in my own work and my own projects, and I thought, then eventually I thought, well, I wonder what's happening with his work. I mean, this is, I realized too that it had gone out of print too. I think after he died, his work, his novels had gone out of print, and I thought, what a shame. What's for this whole big magnificent project to die of stillbirth. It just for me it cut me to the quick. I didn't know. I thought, well, this should not happen. And so eventually I got a hold of his estate. I mean, that took a bit of doing. Actually, it was difficult sledding to try to find somebody who actually was his literary executor and who had some authority. And so eventually I made contact, and after a kind of long series of negotiations, I was triangulated with my own literary agent in New York, Peter Ruby. We came to an agreement whereby I was given the commission to rewrite and edit all the novels, and then through Peter Ruby, we got a republication deal with Gollancz in London for the first 4 novels of the 12 novel sequence. And it was actually, and I should add, it was a difficult thing, I mean, as significant as his achievement was. I mean, it's a very, very traditional body of work. It's very traditional narrative. I mean, he was an old-fashioned English gentleman. His work is very narrative driven, and his great kind of models were men like writers like Rider Haggard, who wrote She, Aisha, the great romance in the traditional sense, not romance as Bill said in one of his articles about in the Harlequin sense. He was the great romance novelist Robert Louis Stevenson, Rider Haggard. He was a big fan of Sherlock Holmes, and of course, Conan Doyle wrote The Lost World, which I think heavily influenced Bill Sargent. So Bill Sargent, basically uses the same conceit that Doyle used with The Lost World, which is a plateau. The Lost World, in Doyle's case, being a plateau in South America, like this lost world, this lost plateau with these prehistoric creatures. And so I think that captured Bill's imagination, and he thought of doing. It prompted him to do something, I think, thematically analogous, and that's what really the Perilous Quest for Lyonesse is, a kind of thematically analogous work. However, this is where again my role kind of I think comes significantly into play. Bill's first idea was that like Rockall, this lost world of Rockall would be a kind of island continent nation in the North Atlantic, a bit like Switzerland, just off the beaten track, and nobody really knows about it. A kind of a lost world, somewhat like this lost plateau in South America and in the Andes, or in the jungle, in the Brazilian jungle. And so it's just, this was before the internet, before GPS, before satellite imagery. So it just didn't make sense. I mean, I think as a conceit, it did not make sense. It was not logically coherent. And so I introduced the whole idea of Rockall being entered by way of a wormhole in the North Atlantic that opens and closes, that it was more open during the Middle Ages, and hence during the Middle Ages there were more stories abounding about ships coming from Rockall, that there was a kind of an island somewhere to the west, or there was a land somewhere to the west that mainland Europeans, or even not mainland Europeans, and even the people from the British Isles didn't really know much about, because it was just so remote and off the beaten track. And of course, that brings in the whole idea too of the classical conception, the ultima thule, the ultimate thule, the land somewhere in the confines of the north that we really don't know much about. So I think that entered into Bill's imagination as well. However, so I brought in this whole concept of a wormhole, and that the whole prologue, basically sets the scene, right? That this is a an imaginary world that's set in another dimension that you enter by way of a wormhole. And so that was my contribution. And so, yeah, that's how we. That's when I started to rewrite and rework the whole series. I mean, that was one of the first things I did, is to introduce this prologue.
Now,
Yeah.
while this was happening, and while you were making contact with the estate, were you still writing your own?
Yeah, I was still writing my own. I mean, my own, quintet of novels that are only like there. Two have been published. I mean, the whole project was put into suspension because, well, personal travails and personal crisis. And so a lot of that, I mean, my work was put into a kind of state of suspended animation. But I was working on my own novels as well. These, again, fantasy novels, that were my own project. Well, and in collaboration with my good friend Jim Anderson. Although I'm the kind of originator of the project, but I brought him on board when I almost sold the first novel in the series, The Stone Holding. It was almost sold to Tor Books in New York. And then, their senior commissioning editor, he said, well, this is, he was making all these noises about this is great work, and he just needs to kind of polish up a few things. And I was just frustrated at that point. I didn't know exactly what I needed to polish, and I was just too close to it. And so that's when I brought my friend on board, and he kind of helped me to kind of transform the whole thing and to bring it up to what I think is a very, very high standard.
So what is the name of the series that you were working on your own?
Yeah. Legacy of the Stone Harp, and it's projected to be a quintet. I mean, the first novel is called The Stone Holding, and the second one is Darkling Fields of Arvon, both published by Baen Books. And basically, well, Baen, well known for science fiction, and this was a kind of foray into fantasy, which was not typical for them.
So is that a series that you're going to continue at some point, or?
Yeah, I am definitely, continuing it. Yeah, just basically, it's the time. Time is the big enemy, right?
Right, of
Time
course,
deficit,
yeah.
as with most people, right?
And the Perilous Quest is such a huge project.
Yeah.
Huge
So
book
I got two
series.
huge projects, and
Now, if somebody wanted to pick up one of those.
It's all on Amazon. They're all available on
Oh,
Amazon.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay,
And
so
other book vendors like Barnes and Noble, et cetera, et cetera. I mean,
right.
all the major vendors. Yeah.
So as far as the two volumes that are now available, it's the Princes of Sundancery is the first book in this series, and then Lords of the Stony Mountain. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
Right. So if
Stony Mountains.
Stony Mountains.
Yeah,
So if you were to try to envision the kind of reader that would enjoy these books, is there comparable novels or genres that you?
Excellent question. Yeah, that's an excellent question. I would say, I mean, these are very. I would. I mean, dare I say? I mean, it's a cliche, I know, but in some ways to compare it to Tolkien. It's such a traditional body of work, and I think the whole, just as Tolkien's work is totally suffused with his Christianity in a kind of very tacit way. I would dare I say my own work and Bill's work. I mean that the whole idea of the three transcendentals, truth, goody, and goodness, suffuse the work. They undergird the work. I mean, it's not overt. I mean, there's no any kind of overt preaching or anything like that. This is not Christian novels as such. They were just novels written by a Christian, just as my novels are novels written by a Christian. And so they kind of totally run against the grain of the kind of ghoulish, I would say, dare I say, ghoulish, kind of counter the kind of cultural decadence that exists out there today. So it's going to appeal, I think, to readers who have a sense of preserving some vestiges of kind of Judeo-Christian civilization, and so it runs into in that great stream of literature that goes back even to pre-Christian work like Homer and Virgil, where narrative, the story, that kind of like the idea of virtue, the idea of truth, goodness, beauty, the idea that there's a kind of transcendent morality is embedded in the work itself, and a way that it really runs totally counter to what we have today in the modern world, where it's a kind of a moral anarchy. So I'd say they're very uh, unanarchic novels, right? And they preserve the idea that there is truth, there is goodness, there is beauty, and it's all embedded in the kind of the narrative. There's a kind of linear narrative. There is a drive towards achieving a goal, the hero's journey. I mean, and to use that kind of typology as well.
Would it be fair to say that fans of Lewis and Tolkien would appreciate it?
Absolutely, I absolutely, I would, yeah, unequivocally, I would agree. I would say that they would appreciate this work. I think there's very little out there that would kind of satisfies that kind of reader. I mean, really, we're swimming in a world of I think moral anarchy, and this is a refreshing difference from that kind of the kind of mainstream. I was going to say, yeah, my first encounter with another, I just remembered. I mean, that this is maybe an interesting, kind of parenthetical observation. That my first encounter with Bill's work when I picked up Princess of Sundancery very serendipitously was when I started reading it, and I just got hooked by it. It reminds me of when I first encountered the Western writer Louis L'Amour, whom I became a fanatical admirer of his work, and I read everything. I picked up one of his like early novels set in the, where the whole Sackett saga begins in Elizabethan England, and I happened to I never read Westerns before that,
right?
And I wouldn't have thought, I wouldn't have been caught dead with a Western. It seemed so, like it wasn't me. But so I picked up one of the early, like Fair Blows the Wind or something like that. I think it's one of the first Sackett novel set in Elizabethan England, and I started again. I was at a secondhand bookstore, and I picked it up by chance. Started reading it, and I was totally hooked in. I said, "This guy's a great writer. I mean, this guy really knows how to tell a story." And then I ended up reading all 100 Louis L'Amours. Right? I think he's just a fantastic craftsman. So, but again, he was a very, very traditional craftsman. He's very, very much in the line of like Rider Haggard, Robert Louis Stevenson, a man who tells a story and who like there's a moral architecture in the story. That we don't get anymore these days, and so I think a similar sort of thing applies. I would say to the Perilous Quest for Lyonesse and my own work, and these are rare things today. This kind of neo-romantic. I mean, I don't know if Louis L'Amour was Christian, but I dare say he was. I mean, I suspect that he was. That's kind of he's an old Western man. I think again, to refer back to C.S. Lewis, I'd say that the big reason for reading the Perilous Quest for Lyonesse would be because you're reading the work of an old Western man, and old Western men are like dinosaurs these days.
That's how Lewis described himself.
Well, that's a wonderful. His inaugural address at Cambridge. I mean, that's I've got a whole essay on the project that was published in an anthology put out by Mark Wolf, the scholar of he actually he did groundbreaking scholarly work in this whole academic area of imaginary worlds, and so I've come to know Mark. And Mark asked me to write. Mark knew Bill, had met Bill Sargent, so he asked me and admired his work, and Mark asked me to write this kind of critical essay on how I came to be involved in the project and how the whole thing unfolded. And so that's been published in an anthology edited by Mark.
Oh, fantastic!
So I mentioned that that's how I close it off, right? The essay is that Bill was an old Western man. I mean, it's fun. There's all these kind of this nexus of connections, that he was a man who studied dinosaurs. And in a way, he was a literary dinosaur himself. But a dinosaur well worth restoring, well worth venerating
Right.
as a superb literary craftsman.
Fantastic. Getting back to world building a little bit, you were
Yeah,
talking about the, the,
yeah,
the massive project that Bill had
yeah,
undertaken in building this world.
yeah.
Are you are you continuing the world building, or is it complete? Is it
No,
already?
I would say it's not complete. I would say that I have latitude to kind of expand on it. So it's actually it's a beautifully situated imaginary world because it's kind of in the North Atlantic on the western edges of in the Middle Ages would be considered the known world, right? And so there were all these kind of cultural influences that would have that could be were brought to bear on Rockall, which is a place that people would reach serendipitously when the wormhole happened to open or close or whatever, right? So you had like colonies of Templars, like Bill has in the novels. He makes references to Templars who settled in Rockall, and so of course the legend has it that after the Great Suppression of the Templars in France, that some of them escaped to like, I mean, there's legends about them escaping to North America. There's and then anyway, Rockall would be a natural like hiding hole or escape place. So there's latitude for me to introduce other elements, and his Arthurian elements as well. I mean, Lyonesse, of course, has an Arthurian theme, and so there's all these kind of legendary connections with King Arthur that surround Rockall and Lyonesse. And so I'd like to build on that too. And then the whole idea of nobody knows exactly where King Arthur was buried, and so the thought crosses my mind of introducing that element into the story. And of course, there are the Vikings. There are all these kind of cultural influences. There's another book by a guy, a scholar named Felice, an Italian scholar, who actually situates the Greek myths in the Baltic area. He makes a kind of a very scholarly argument that the Achaeans were situated in the Baltic, and that all the stories, the Homeric epics, were really, geographically situated in the Baltic, and then because of some drastic change in climate, that the Achaeans were forced to move southwards to the Greek peninsula. So there's that as well. I'm thinking, that'd be an interesting concept to introduce. So like
Right.
these ideas are rattling around in my brain, and so I do have the latitude to expand on the story.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I probably be a good time then to talk now in relation to that about just the general setting of the book. How does the book, what's the setting of at
Oh,
least
okay.
the
I see. All
initial?
right. The book really well opens after the prologue. I mean, prologue again. The prologue really hinges on this kind of lost manuscript motif, right? Which is a kind of classic device. And so this lost manuscript is found, and it's really it's the kind of history of Rockall in the 15th century. A history as written in the first person by a protagonist named Simon Branthwaite. Now, Simon, the first chapter of the story, the novel itself, Princess of Sundancery, the first chapter opens with in England, and the first several chapters are situated in England, in 1403. At the battle of, in the wake of the Battle of Shrewsbury, wherein King Henry IV defeated Harry Hotspur. And so Simon's father and brother were rebels, right? So they're forced to flee England, and Simon just knows vaguely that they escaped to Lyonesse. They went westward somewhere, and he only knows that they went somewhere to the kind of legendary place called Lyonesse with all these Arthurian overtones. And so Simon resolves to follow them, and so that's how he ends up boarding a ship in Bristol, on the port city of Bristol, a ship bound for Rockall, which it's supposed is probably Lyonesse must be close to Rockall. That's what he supposes, right? Or that's somehow connected to Rockall. And so that's how he ends up in this imaginary continent. And so, the first few chapters, of course, as I say, are situated in England, and then he ends up in Rockall, where for all 12 novels happen in 15th century Rockall and medieval Rockall, which is much like medieval Europe, medieval England. So it's the technology and is more or less similar. It's a kind of medieval technology. It's not advanced or anything like that. The world is very similar but different to our world or to the medieval European world. I mean, there are these strange animals, these strange the strange flora and fauna. Like Bill brings in a lot of like quasi prehistoric animals into play. These animals of his imagination, based on his work as a paleontologist. And also the whole island of Rockall is again is this is Bill's whole conception is related to the Atlantis legend as well. That's another critical aspect here, and not just the Lyonesse and the Arthurian connection, but also Atlantis. Rockall is thought to be like the northern part of a whole sunken continent of Atlantis.
Now, let me just interject here in case anyone doesn't know.
Yeah.
Rockall is an actual very tiny island.
Yeah, it is. We should. Yeah. Rockall is just a tiny islet of 20 meters, and it's disputed. I mean, the UK, thinks that it's part of their kind of sovereign territory, or it belongs in their kind of zone of economic control. I'm not. Anyway. It was once, I think, some kind of military outpost of the British Army, I think in the 1950s or 60s, and
in reality, and it naturally lends itself to kind of mystery, right? I mean,
it does, yeah. And that's what prompted Bill to. I mean, he was a child growing up in Sheffield, in England, and he was born in 1935, so he was a child during the Second World War, and experienced the bombing raids. And so he spent a lot of time as an only child, and there was a lot, he went through periods of sickness where he did a lot of reading. And so for him, this was a whole fantasy world that he developed even as a child. He developed around the idea of Rockall, because he looked at a map and he saw this kind of rocky islet, and he thought, man, I wonder, like he's thinking, his imagination ran amok, and he was thinking, what if it's a whole other country, and it has its own customs and its own flora and fauna and its own geology? And so he articulated and he developed this whole world even as a child, he came back to it later when he was in his 40s, because he'd always he dreamed about writing a cycle of novels based on his imaginary world.
I think that's really an amazing part of the whole story here, is that as a child he was looking at this rock basically in the middle of the North Atlantic, this mysterious, seemingly sunken landmass as a child, but then he later becomes a geologist, right? And so this becomes the actual area of his study. That's right. Amazing.
Yeah, it is quite amazing. And so there's that the whole Atlantis legend is built into his kind of his thematic universe as well. So Rockall is the northern part of the whole sunken continent of Atlantis. So there are undersea ridges in the North Atlantic that are named after place names in Rockall, and also place names in Lord of the Rings. So Bill was very proud of that he shared there was a geological nomenclature that he shared with Tolkien. And so the story is that there were these Varangisatarans. They were people who they were kind of a military fascistic people who conquered all of Rockall, and then they were defeated as a result of a kind of geological cataclysm, much like whatever happened to Atlantis, if Atlantis existed. There was some kind of catastrophic event that basically caused Atlantis to sink into the sea. So the same thing happened to Rockall, but there is a kind of remnant portion of Atlantis that remained, and that was the continent of Rockall, which is about half the size of Australia in Bill's conjecture. And then the whole 12 novel cycle revolves around the idea, it's Simon, the protagonist, who in the end he helps to avert a resurgence of the evil hegemonic, conquering fascistic people, the Varangisatarans, right? So they avert this catastrophe of a reemerging totalitarian state. So that's kind of that's the kind of the underlying sort of driving theme of the work. We look at as a whole, all the 12 novels, the architectonic of the whole thing, what it would be like that's where the kind of plot line revolves around in the end, that they're kind of averted.
I love the sense, really, in Bill's story, the sense of destiny that is involved here, because he started out as a child. And I was thinking also too, when you were mentioning that kind of he was like an only child, he was sick a lot. It was reminding me of Lewis himself, of C.S. Lewis himself. His struggles as a young man, and his kind of retreating into his imagination. But then in Bill's case, for him to be interested in this island and then go on to become a geologist, it's just so interesting. And it made me think.
He thought even he even thought that, maybe I was just reading to that. I mean, he thought maybe even the idea of rock call propelled him in the direction of geology, right?
It's the secondary world encroaching upon
for him. Well, as I said, as just as philology was a secondary world, was the kind of propelling force for Tolkien.
Right.
Geology was a kind of propelling kind of substrate for Bill Sargent.
Related to his geology, didn't he get the opportunity to actually name some regions in the North Atlantic? Was that?
No, well, he didn't name them. Somebody else did, which was made him a greater honor, because it wasn't some kind of it wasn't shameless self-promotion. It was actually, I think, some sort of geological society in England or Scotland actually proposed, named these undersea ridges around Rockall. It's called the undersea kind of ridge was called the Rockall Plateau, or the suboceanic place of the area was called the Rockall Plateau. And there were a lot of locations there in that plateau that were named after his novels: Lyonesse, Owlsgard, Sandaster.
Wow.
And also there were other names named after Tolkien's, after Lord of the Rings, right? The things, there's Edoras Bank, there's Gondor Seamount, and there's Gandalf Spur.
That is amazing.
So he was very proud of that.
There's some trivia for Tolkien fans that I bet a lot of them didn't even know. I didn't realize that. That's really amazing.
No, that's quite amazing. No, this is a very significant project. I don't think Bill, I mean, it's not the same. I think Tolkien is a man of there's a kind of metaphysical depth to Tolkien I think is unmatchable. I think even Bill would concede that, right?
Sure.
But in terms of the kind of ethos, the spirit, it's very much in line with what Tolkien accomplished, right? There's an amplitude of imagination here, and a breadth and a depth there that's unmistakable and unmatchable.
Right.
It's a great achievement.
Didn't Bill write a paper about the geology of Middle Earth? I think we have that available on the website.
He wrote a paper in 1992 that was delivered in 1992 at Oxford on the centenary of Tolkien's birth. And he wrote another book on the Shire, its bounds, food and farming as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. So that first article we mentioned, people should go to the website and check it out.
Correct.
You can download it right on the website.
Yeah.
And so I guess this would be a good time to just talk about the website a little bit that you've put together. It's going to be a great place for people to make contact with you, actually, directly through.
That's right.
You're going to have a blog that you're going to be updating frequently. And it would also just be a great place for people to make contact with you. They could submit the contact form. They can actually reply to the blog posts.
That's right.
And things of that nature.
No, I welcome that. That would be great. I welcome the input.
Okay. And also
communication.
You have a YouTube channel I believe, right?
Yes.
Old Western
Old
Man
Western
is
Man, yes.
okay. And so people will
Yeah,
be able to stay
yeah.
in contact with you there, and
Yeah,
you'll be
yeah, that's
up.
a theme that's close to my heart, Old Western Man. I mean,
Right.
I love that. I love that idea of C.S. Lewis. I'm very much a literary traditionalist myself,
Right.
and revere the old literary forms that again that we've sort of more or less abandoned as a society, and I think that we need to recover. We need to recover. We need to recover Western civilization, basically.
So
Mhm.
let's talk a little bit. We have hopes to bring in Ted Nasmith at some point
Yeah.
in this call, but perhaps prior to that, maybe you could talk a little bit about the art and how Ted came into the project and some of the work he did.
Well, Ted's been a long-standing friend of mine. I mean, Ted and I go back to the mid 1990s. It was when wrote the first the first rendition of my novel. Actually, what became in a reworked version became the Stoneholding it was called Flight to Hollow Mountain, and it was published by Erdmans in Michigan in 1995, 1996. And I wanted. I'd gotten a book of illustrations of Tolkien illustrations. I can't remember what the title. Well, anyway, Ted's work, Rivendell. I mean, just totally riveted me, right? I just thought this is fantastic. What fantastic work! I mean, Ted's work is absolutely out of this world. I mean, I love his kind of realism
I think
and
there's a lot
his
of us Tolkien
yeah
fans that when we're reading The Lord of the Rings or The
yeah
Hobbit and
yeah
we're imagining these places visually in our mind, it ends up being a lot of Ted's artwork
yeah
is
yeah
permanently ingrained
Yeah,
in our
he's far and
minds.
away my favorite Tolkien illustrator, far and away by a
There's
country
even
mile.
a website or a couple of websites out there that compare some of the imagery to the Peter Jackson movies to
Yeah,
some of
yeah. Ted mentioned that
Ted's
to me.
art.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
he's definitely made an amazing impact
yeah,
on the
yeah,
ethos of Middle Earth. No
yeah.
doubt about
So
that.
anyway, so we, through, Erdmans gave me permission to talk to Ted about, getting him to do the artwork for Flight to Hollow Mountain. Which he did, and then we became friends. Then, again, Ted lives, close in, near Toronto, and so almost every year he'd come up to visit me, and we'd spend the weekend together, hoisting a drink or two, and talking matters Tolkienian and so forth, right? And so we became fast friends, and Ted has always been a big supporter of my work over the years, just a stalwart friend and supporter. And so when this whole Rockall project came up, I really wanted Ted. I mean, because of his renown, because of the quality of his work, and because of our friendship, all of these factors conspired together to get me to kind of lobby on his behalf to have him be commissioned to do the artwork.
So
No,
he has painted the first two covers, correct?
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
But the third and fourth are forthcoming, so we haven't settled any of that yet.
Right. And so also people anyone who's interested in the artwork can go right to the perilousquest.com and
Yeah.
check out Ted's art, and I believe you're going to be posting some of the concept art as well
That's
that he
right.
was
Yeah, Ted has
working.
given me permission to post the concept art.
Fantastic. Greetings, everyone. We're here with Ted Nasmith, famed illustrator and artist for the upcoming series, The Perilous Quest of Lyonesse. Great to see you, Ted.
Good to see you, John, too.
Fantastic. So let me just start with, how did you get involved with the project, if you could speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, gosh, I'm trying to remember now. I mean, I imagine Mark had talked about it for quite a while. And at some stage, I guess it took it to the next level. It was going to be confirmed. He was going to be assigned and paid to edit Swithin's epic novels. And, he asked me to consider being the cover artist, which I had no problem with at all. I've been supportive of Mark for a long time now, so happy to get on board with the whole thing. Yeah, it sort of grew over time, I suspect.
Were you familiar with the books beforehand?
No, not particularly. I knew about them, and I have met Anthony Swithin, Bill Sargent in the past in Mythopoeic Society meetings in the 80s, you know. So I knew about him. I didn't know he was as prolific a novelist as he turns out to be, or that the books had been published in the 90s, and then just didn't seem to find a readership, you know, a bit too wordy and so on. But, you know, a brilliant concept, and, you know, the man was a person of substance. So,
well,
yeah.
that's really interesting. So you did get to meet him in the 80s at kind of
Yeah,
like Tolkien conventions?
Yes, a couple of times I definitely did that, and watched his presentation, which was generally, you know, comparing landforms in Middle Earth with real geological and geographical places, and showing that, you know, anomalies like Tolkien described in fact exist in many places. So, yeah, that was the sort of the gist of it. But, you know, I didn't realize, I mean, he was quite a bit more than that.
Oh, that's really interesting because we talking to Mark about Bill, we discussed a little bit about the papers that he wrote and talking about Middle Earth in a geological scientific setting. And actually, one of his papers, which might have actually been the presentation you saw, is available on the website, so people can actually go and actually read that paper about geology in Middle Earth. Geology in Middle Earth, I believe.
That's the one, yeah, yeah.
So that's really interesting that you actually got to see that. And
Sure.
I believe it was for, I believe he wrote one of his papers for the centennial of the Tolkien centennial celebration.
That's quite likely to be the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I'd have to check back and see whether he was there in '92.
Right.
I was there for that too. Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah, that was quite a situation, a bit of a banquet, you might say.
Well, that's really cool that you have that connection there, though. That
Yeah.
you got to see his work
Definitely.
and listen to him speak in person. That's
Yeah,
really neat.
yeah, he's in the community, and I'm part of that, and you know, it's all part of a larger picture, definitely.
Right, that's awesome. So when you did begin the work for the book series, now how many paintings have you done? Is it 2?
Just the 2 so far.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the 2 books that are released right now, Princess of Sundancery and Lords of the Stony Mountain, are the two paintings so far. So did you begin in order? Did you do them in order?
Yep. First one was the Princess of Sundancery. Yeah, got familiar with that story a bit more, and the characters, etc. All I needed to know in order to come up with 4 or 5 different cover possibilities and concepts. I think you may have seen some of the extra sketches there.
Yes, we thank you so much for that too. We've been posting some of the concept art and the sketches on the website, which is really beautiful stuff as well. So as far as the first book, Princes, how did you guys arrive at what was going to be the cover? Because it's definitely totally different than the original published edition by the previous artist.
Yeah, it is. Although both of them feature the, I guess, castle.
Right.
The sort of oddly shaped castle there.
Yes.
And I did take that fairly carefully and read the descriptions and discussed it with Mark. I would have been with, let's see, Rachel Sargent and her input that helped guide the decision on which image we would use for the final kind of cover design. And we just went from there. It was just like we looked at all of them, and it was a toss-up at times which one we would go with. But I felt that, yeah, it was one that would remind people a bit of the earlier book, and also, you know, just be a nice, you know, brilliant sort of sunset scene like that with, you know, and introduce you to essentially to the place that we're, you know, that we're in. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful cover, and it features some of the strange animal, the wildlife that he was into, like developing, and you know that's part of his whole world building thing. Is the fauna of his world is kind of slightly shifted from the real world, you know.
Yeah, so we get a taste of that one. Yeah.
Right, exactly, and I believe that's actually a scene from the beginning of the first book. Where she's riding out from the castle to meet the main character of the book. I don't want to reveal too much for anybody who's going to read the book, but that's a really interesting scene. So that was an interesting choice. But I also like how between the two covers, and it'll be interesting to see if this continued theme plays out in the rest of the books. I feel like there's like a definite color mood so far for each book. Like the first book is kind of like a sunset, and then the second book has that stony gray feel, which I like. I like to see that color theme for each. You know.
Oh yeah.
Was
yeah.
that
Well,
conscious?
whatever I come up with is going to be a strong image, I hope, and you know, I'm pretty confident about that, and we'll see where it takes me. You know, I'm open to possibilities. Yeah.
And the second book, can you talk a little bit about that? The art for that?
Yeah, it was clear to me after looking at it, about 2 or 3 different design ideas, that this one with the fellow that was the fugitive, and he's about to, you know, try to escape by, you know, going down the side of the mountain, and that turns out to be a bad idea. But I thought it was pretty easy to dramatize, and we get a lot of atmosphere in that, and there wasn't a huge amount of detail involved, which is always good for a cover piece. And so it just sort of it created itself in some ways once I got onto that.
That's the image actually we chose for the kind of the color scheme of the website. We chose that nice. That image kind of as like the homepage, which set a nice tone for the color of the whole website. So that was really nice for us to work with. But okay, so do you know if there's is there any talk yet about future covers, or we're kind of waiting to see what happens?
Yeah, nothing so far, and I am waiting and kind of ready to hear more about that when it comes up, and hopefully we'll move quickly on the whole thing. So I imagine there'll be 2 more covers to come down the pipe, probably another year or so before Mark's ready to go with that. Yeah, happy to jump in as and when that happens.
Fantastic. Now, how did you meet Mark? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because you guys have been friends a long time.
Yes, that's right. I mean, what does this? It goes back to the 80s at least. He came to me. He was publishing his novel for the first time. It was about to be published, called Flight to Hollow Mountain, the original title of the novel, now called The Stoneholding, of course. And he, you know, mentioned that he lived up near Ottawa in sort of this wild country in the Madawaska Valley, and we just seemed to click, and generally once because he'd come to me asking for the cover art, and I said, sure, you know, that's here's what I'll charge for it, and so on. And it was pretty casual and simple. And when that happened, and we managed to, and, you know, he invited me to come up and meet him in his place anytime I wanted to do so, which I decided I would do. And yeah, we just ended up becoming friends, and there he was with his homestead out in the middle of nowhere, his acreage, and this old house, and 9 kids, or at least they became 9. It was about, I think, 7 at that point, 6. They just kept on coming, and I just love this kind of home situation that he had at that point, you know, with everybody. And I sort of adopted all of them as well, and they loved me, and it just became a regular thing for me to drive up there. And there's a point where on the highway you kind of come through this gateway, and all of a sudden it opens up with this massive lake and birch-clad sort of hills and mountains beyond that, a very Canadian and an Ontario scene. Wow. And I always thought of it as kind of the gates of Middle Earth for me.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's all. That's a fantastic story. That's really nice. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, is there anything else you want to mention about the book series or the art? Or
yeah, well, I'll say the following about Mark. I mean, he, to me, is a massively talented novelist. I mean, there's just no question about that. I was captured by his sensitivity toward Tolkien and C.S. Lewis as well. I mean, he's well versed in all of that. He could have been an Oxford scholar, and he chose to, you know, move up to the countryside and raise his family in what he hoped were more idealistic circumstances. And, you know, for him to devote himself to editing another author's fantasy epic with the Rockall series, it's, to me, an extraordinary situation, because he is, to me, comparable to a Tolkien or another fantasist who has a strong grasp of the background culture that's involved in it and what he's out to do with that. The Christian connections for him, of course, are very important. And, you know, I'm very supportive of someone who's that, you know, gifted and willing to go to the lengths he has with, you know, not a lot of reward so far for it, although Stone Holding has done reasonably well, and the sequel is out, and it's also brilliant. I'm waiting for the third book, you know, very avidly as well, and hope to continue to work with Mark as his fortunes rise. But yeah, I truly admire him and his devotion to what he does and his talent for it.
Fantastic. That was beautiful. Okay, Ted, thank you so much for talking about the new series. Also, do you want to say anything about any of your upcoming work in other areas, or maybe how people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, things are ticking along very nicely for me as far as you know, my interest in J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm, you know, receiving commissions on a regular basis these days. Alex Lewis is acting as my agent, and he's doing a brilliant job with that. He talks to the clients and deals with the back and forth on the criteria and the content of the artwork, and then lets me get on with it. And that has worked out very well indeed. We have 2 or 3 jobs coming up soon. We're just about to start one now, scene from the Silmarillion. And it's very inspiring to see how many people who love the books are willing to commission me to do personal artwork, and how often those works of art resonate strongly with me in terms of my own personal interest in subjects from either the Silmarillion or other Tolkien-themed scenes, you know, Lord of the Rings or anything. Yeah, so I'm doing well with that. I've just finished doing a tattoo design for a fellow from the U.S. Navy. And you know, that came out very nicely indeed. We're just waiting for that to be concluded, and I'll send him the artwork and so on. Let's see what else. I'm interested in NFTs these days, and started to look into the possibilities of putting out one at least or more, and considering, you know, that possibility as an investment idea, and reading up on it. So someone may be the one who gets the very first Ted Nasmith NFT. And we'll see how that all goes too. But those are some of the possibilities out there these days.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, I count my blessings. I absolutely do.
But, oh, that's beautiful. So if somebody does want to get a commission from you or get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Then they go to Alex Lewis, and I can certainly put them on to him if they come to me personally as well.
So, and they would go to your website and just email you from your website?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's right, the website, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, Ted, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
All right, thank you, John. Okay. Thank you so much. Good to talk.
Take care. Fair travels.
Sure. Yeah.
So, Mark, it's been fantastic talking to you. I'm really excited about this project myself, and I know you are as well, to continue this journey in the Perilous Quest. So, is there anything else you'd want to leave people with as we say goodbye?
No, I think I've covered a lot of the bases, and that's good. And I'm really thankful to you, John, for you've been a charming and intelligent interviewer, and I really appreciate your enthusiasm for the project. And,
fantastic.
And your support.
Thank you so much. And again, anybody who wants to get in touch with Mark, just get on the website and shoot him an email.
Okay, thanks again, John.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.